Okay, let's wrap up this chapter's lecture videos by talking a little about the structure of nerves. And we should also look at the ganglia. So without a further ado, let's make a start of the first of these topics. So, what is a nerve? What makes a nerve? Remember in the last video you saw the major nerves of the upper limb being built, but you were never really explained what these nerves that we were building really were composed of. Let's tackle this first. So here is one definition. They are these cord-like bundles of axons closed in a connective tissue. And here is actually a real microscopic image, a scanning electron microscopy image of an actual nerve. Let's see what we can find there. We can see a central blood vessel that supplies resources for this structure, but more importantly, we see a huge number of nerve fibers packed together, wrapped in various different layers of connective tissue. And here is a rather nice diagrammatic representation of the same structures. And we also have multiple layers of connective tissue around the nerve fibers, as I said, so it gets packed on many levels. Well, the last thing that I want to add to this slide is the fact that there are two types of nerves that we should note, and they are classified in two based on where they originate. These were spinal and cranial nerves. And we saw some examples of the spinal nerves that then contributed to the brachial plexus and from there to the nerve innervation of the upper limb in our model with the clay structures. In fact, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And now I would like us to talk a little bit about the cranial nerves. So these are the nerves that arise directly from the brain on its base. Let's have a look of these. Here we have a diagram of a brain as seen from the below, and the anterior is at the top of the screen and the posterior at the bottom of the screen. And we can see that there are a number of expansions coming out from there. Well, I have a better picture to guide us through them. So this is the same brain, but this time I have colored and labeled each of these nerves. And you can find this picture in the activity area of your learning module, so you can save it and print it for yourself in case you wish to study this using it alongside this video and notes. And there are actually 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and we will go through these just quickly. For more detail on each, please consult your other resources, but this will get you started. So, first cranial nerve pair is our olfactory nerves. These are responsible for the smell and are the most anterior of these, located just above the nasal cavity. Second, we have optic nerves, which go to our eyes, carrying the information from the vision. Then we have third cranial nerve pair. These are oculomotor nerves, which along fourth, this is trochlear nerve pair, and sixth, which is abducens pair, they all are responsible for moving the muscles of the eye. And you might sometimes see how a doctor asks a patient to follow a tip of a pen or a light and then moves it. This is the medical doctor testing each of these cranial nerves that supply different muscles that move the eye. This relatively simple test can tell us a lot about if all these three cranial nerve pairs are working as they should. Let's get back to the others. The fifth cranial nerve pair is the trigeminals. They innervate the muscles of mastication, for example. And the seventh is our facial nerves. They, with their specific branches, supply the muscles of the face. Then we have vestibulocochlear nerve pair as eighth, which contribute to the sensation of the hearing and also to the balance. We have ninth cranial nerve pair, which is known as glossopharyngeal nerves. These innervate the pharynx and salivary glands. 10th is vagus nerves. One of its function is swallowing, but it really is involved in pretty much everywhere. When I was a student on a neuroscience class in uni, my rule of thumb was always that if you do not know what nerve does something, it probably is vagus. But that might not be a great strategy for you at this stage of the studies. The 11th nerve pair is the accessory nerves. They supply muscles of the neck and back. And the last but not least cranial nerve pair is the hypoglossals. They innervate, for example, the tongue. Remember the term glossal for this area of the body. So there you have it, a quick overview of the cranial nerves. And you might ask me, how do I remember these and their order? Well, there are many good mnemonics out there. You can Google some, but the one that I remember using as a student was on old Olympus towering top, a Finn and German viewed some hops. Or, ooh, 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 to touch and feel very good velvet, such heaven. There is one other one, but it is so rude that I cannot share it with you here. Just Google if you want more options. Well, let's go back to talk about the structure of a nerve for a second. Remember that most nerves are a mixture of afferent and efferent fibers, as well as the somatic and autonomic visceral fibers. And in addition, nerves can be classified based on the direction to which they carry impulses to and from. Let's look at this for a second. Remember this diagram from earlier. Let's use this to help us to review this concept. So, some nerves carry sensory messages to the central nervous system. These are known as afferent nerves. And some nerves carry motor messages from the CNS to the peripheral nervous system. These are known as efferent nerves. But pure sensory or motory nerves are rare. Most of the nerves are actually mixed ones. The next concept that I should talk in relation to the spinal nerves is the ganglia. And ganglia are basically bundles of nerve cells, cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. And you can see some of those here in this diagram. And we have already talked about the dorsal root ganglia in chapter 12, and we will talk more about these in the next chapter too. Finally, to wrap up our discussion on spinal nerves, I want to briefly mention dermatomes. These are the areas of skin that are innervated by a single spinal nerve. And based off these, we can draw these maps of dermatomes. And why would this be useful, you might ask? Well, we can use them to assess, for example, the region of a spinal cord injury. However, one last word of warning. These areas of dermatomes typically overlap a fair bit, so it is not always as straightforward as you might expect based on these maps. Okay, I think that this is a good place for us to wrap it up for this video. For our very last topic on this module, we will look at reflexes. Make sure to check it out.